watching Kenosha Community Television. Stop on down and become a friend of Harbor Market. Hello and welcome to another edition of Shaking Up Kenosha. My name is Jeff Roberts and I'll be your host for this program. Today we have with us Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley. Welcome.
Thank you for having me on, Jeff.
This is one of those programs where we're going to have a lot of fun. We're going to have to talk about some things that everybody might be curious about, and I hope that we'll be able to answer some of those questions. What got you started in law? Why law?
I go back to high school. I have a little story to tell that I think is emblematic of how I started thinking about the law. My family posted an editorial cartoon of a little girl speaking to her teacher, and the teacher said, "Watch out for that one. She just wrote a paper on the First Amendment." And I remember sitting around the kitchen table with my dad and my brother. They were both history majors. My brother's a high school teacher who teaches history and government, and we would talk about the law and government and the issues of the day. So it goes back to high school for me.
When you decided it was going to be your vocation, was it one of those where you decided, right, this is it, this is what I want to do? Or was it a case of, well, if I can't do this, then I'm going to do something else? How did that work out?
I was pretty committed to going to law school back in high school, and throughout college I maintained that goal, and I went to law school right after I graduated from Marquette.
When you think about the career itself and the impact that your career has had, you first have to become a lawyer, and you have to go to law school and finish all of that. Then you became a judge. Now you're a Supreme Court candidate. You were appointed temporarily, of course, to the Supreme Court. But how is it that the Supreme Court and all of the things that you do, how is it that you can bend, fold, mutilate, and spindle your life around that? Because that's got to take up a lot of time.
It is, but I really love what I do. I love being a justice. Being a judge has been the most wonderful professional experience of my life. And I can now say I'm one of those people who would do what I do even if I weren't paid to do it. I enjoy it that much. It doesn't feel like work for me because I'm so passionate about the law and the Constitution, and it really is an honor and a privilege to serve the people of Wisconsin in this role.
How long were you a lawyer before you became, and were you primarily a defense lawyer or a prosecutor?
Neither, actually. I was in private legal practice for 16 and a half years. I was a civil litigator, a business transactional attorney, an arbitrator, and bringing some kind of unique experience to the Supreme Court. I was also vice president of legal operations for an international software company headquartered right here in Wisconsin.
Now that really kind of throws a monkey wrench into things, doesn't it? Usually you hear about a Supreme Court justice being either a prosecutor or a defense attorney, mostly prosecutors, right?
We have, just looking at the current composition of the court, we have justices who come from all different backgrounds. We have a couple of justices who come from a tax background. We have former prosecutors. We have former civil litigators like me. But each of us brings diverse experience to the court. And I think that's really important because of the wide variety of types of cases that we hear and the different subject matters that we hear. We can draw on each other's experiences and backgrounds and prior areas of expertise as lawyers as we're deciding the complex issues that are presented to us. But I also have criminal law experience from my service on the trial court bench in Milwaukee County and as a District 1 Court of Appeals judge out of Milwaukee County.
Now that brings up an interesting point that I have to ask this. There's a lot of influence in the way that the lower courts see cases and a lot of the things that happen. Does that really happen on the Supreme Court, or is it a totally different atmosphere?
It's a really different atmosphere because the trial court judges, we like to say they're kind of in the trenches. They're the ones who are presiding over trials. And then if somebody doesn't like the outcome that they obtain as a litigant in those cases, they have a right to appeal to the Court of Appeals. And then a case reaches the Wisconsin Supreme Court only if the justices collectively determine that it's a case significant enough that it doesn't just impact the parties in that case, it impacts other people in Wisconsin and has a broader effect and reach. So we select cases that are of significance to the people of Wisconsin.
How is it that you determine what the significance might be? Is it the current political atmosphere? Is it based solely on constitutional law? Combination of both?
We actually have statutory factors that guide our decision as to whether or not to take a case. For example, if there's a case that presents a significant issue of constitutional law, that's the type of case we'd take. If we have lower courts, the Court of Appeals, the trial courts, deciding cases based on the same law differently, they're reaching different outcomes applying the law, so there's some kind of conflict in the system, that's a type of case also that we would take to resolve that conflict.
There's a lot of influence between the lower courts and the Supreme Court. How do you kind of separate everything and say, okay, this is what you do, this is what we do? Is that statute or is it constitutional law?
Well, the trial court's job is to resolve any conflicts that come to them, whether that's criminal or civil, and anyone has the right to file a lawsuit if they have a basis for it, or to initiate a criminal law action. Obviously, that happens in prosecutors' offices, and that's how a case is born, and it may or may not work its way up to the Wisconsin Supreme Court.
It's really difficult for a judge at the lower level courts to look at things because sometimes they see people at their very worst day, or they've already experienced their very worst day. Now here's the aftermath. But it's totally different for the Supreme Court, state and U.S. Supreme Court, isn't it?
It is different. I was a trial court judge in Milwaukee County, and I served in children's court. So I heard some pretty emotional cases involving termination of parental rights, children in need of protection or services, and juvenile delinquency matters. It was really an exciting place to work because I felt like I had a direct impact on people's lives, especially the lives of our children in Milwaukee, to hopefully make a positive difference in those lives. At the Supreme Court level, we don't have that direct interaction with parties in the cases. We're interacting with their attorneys who brief the issue. They write written briefs, and then they have oral arguments before us before we decide the case.
Now that could get long and lengthy, can't it? The oral arguments?
Sometimes,
or do you just cut them off?
Sometimes they can. For a typical case, each side has about 30 minutes to argue their case and answer questions that are posed by the justices. Sometimes the justices keep asking questions after the red light goes off.
Really?
Yes.
No, I wouldn't think that.
And the attorney has to ask if it's okay if they answer that question, which it always is. But sometimes they go beyond the hour assigned.
Now, when you become a Supreme Court justice, whether it's state Supreme Court or U.S. Supreme Court, there's a process that you have to follow. What is that process?
Well, it's different depending on the circumstances. For me, I am fulfilling the term of the late Justice Patrick Crooks, who sadly passed away after the term had already started. So under our system, under our Constitution, the governor has the right and the constitutional duty to appoint somebody to fill that term. But of course, I'm standing before the voters on April 5th. So ultimately, under our Wisconsin Constitution, it's up to the people of Wisconsin to decide who they want to serve them on the Wisconsin Supreme Court. Of course, we're going through a different situation with the very sad passing of Justice Antonin Scalia. The federal system does things differently. The president has the right to nominate his successor, and the Senate has the right to confirm or not to confirm that nominee through confirmation hearings.
Right, which we've seen examples of that recently.
Yes.
Several. Walk us through the day of a Supreme Court justice for the state of Wisconsin.
Depends on what we're doing that day. We, on average, meet about 5 to 9 times out of the month. We have oral arguments, for example, coming up next week. So we will have read all of the briefs and the memos that our law clerks and interns write, analyzing the issues presented in the case. And the morning of oral arguments, we meet as a court behind closed doors, and one justice is assigned to report on each case that is coming before the court that day, and kind of lays out the issues to remind the justices of what the case is all about. We then go into oral arguments, which again, for each case, last about an hour. And when oral arguments are done for the day, we go back into our conference room behind closed doors, and we go around the table, and each of us discusses how we think the case should be decided. And that's really one of my favorite parts of the job, because it's kind of an intellectual exchange of ideas, and I really enjoy listening to each of my colleagues' differing perspectives sometimes on how the case should be decided.
Now, is there ever a case where you have to take away all metal objects and not feed anyone once you're in chambers until you come up with a decision? Or is it pretty amicable where everybody works together to get a decision?
Those conversations are always amicable. We have to try to reach a majority decision. We have 7 justices, which means we need to have at least 4 people agree on how the case should be decided. And everyone is always very respectful, professional, and collegial when we're having those conversations.
All right, so here comes the question. This is the one you were waiting for, I know. Who writes the dissenting opinion, or who writes the opinions?
Well, I'll start with who writes the opinion. What happens is each justice is assigned a number. I am J7 because I'm the 7th justice to join the court. And we have poker chips with our numbers on them that are placed into a hat. And it is an Irish hat, kind of like a St. Patrick's Day.
A bowler?
Yes,
bowler?
Exactly. I believe that was provided by the late Justice Pat Crooks. And somebody picks a number out of the hat, and if that number is the number of a justice in the majority, that is the justice who writes the opinion.
Now, what about any dissenting opinion?
All of the other justices have the option to join the majority opinion, or sometimes a justice agrees that the outcome should be what the majority thinks it should be, but they disagree about how to reach that outcome. So they will write what is called a concurring opinion. And then if somebody disagrees with the outcome, they have the right to write a dissenting opinion. And any of the justices has the option of doing that.
Now, is that different than the U.S. Supreme Court?
No.
It's the same way?
It's the same thing.
Wow. No wonder we get all this backlash from whenever there's a dissenting opinion. And the late Justice Scalia was notorious for that. He would always send out a scathing letter afterward. Have you ever had to do that? Where you just absolutely believe this is the wrong decision?
Well, I've been on the court now for 5 months. And while I was on the Court of Appeals, actually, I was writing opinions and joining the opinions of my colleagues. I believe each of the opinions I participated in, we actually had a unanimous panel at the Court of Appeals.
Okay.
I've been on the Supreme Court, like I said, for about 5 months now, and we have a lot of pending decisions, so I can't talk about those yet. Stay tuned.
Stay tuned. And with that, it's time for us to take a pause for the cause. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.
You're watching Kenosha Community Television.
Welcome back. We're here with Supreme Court Justice Rebecca Bradley. And Justice Bradley, when we think about the Supreme Court, there are a lot of distractions out there right now, a lot of garbage talk and so forth. Tell us what kind of an effect that has had on your race up to date.
Well, I think there has been some really irresponsible reporting by some journalists in Wisconsin, primarily the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, which will run stories about me going hunting instead of talking about the real issues in the case. And I think those articles that are being written about everything that is completely irrelevant to the candidates and to the race are distracting the voters from the real issues. I have said from the beginning of my race that I'm really running on my judicial philosophy. I think that's the most important issue to the voters in Wisconsin. They want to know what the philosophical perspectives are of the candidates. And I've been trying to present my judicial philosophy to the voters. My judicial philosophy is that it is our job to say what the law is, not what we may wish it to be. It is our job to set aside personal policy preferences and political inclinations and to apply the law as it is written by the people's elected representatives in the legislature and as it is written in our state and federal constitutions. It is really important to have justices and judges who respect the separation of powers and who will not legislate from the bench. I've been sharing this judicial philosophy with the voters since I entered the race, and I'm also drawing a contrast between my judicial philosophy and that of my opponent. My opponent has told us that she is most philosophically aligned with United States Supreme Court Justices Sonia Sotomayor and Ruth Bader Ginsburg. These are justices who believe in a living constitution, that our constitution doesn't mean what the text of it says, that it should change to reflect evolving political and social conditions. My opponent has said that she thinks it's our job to promote a more equal society, whatever that means in her most subjective opinion. I completely reject this judicial philosophy, and I think the voters of Wisconsin will reject it as well, because they want a justice like me who is capable of setting aside my personal opinions and my policy preferences and just following the law and applying the law regardless of how I feel about the outcome. And that's my commitment to the voters of Wisconsin.
It seems strange that we would have so many distractions, like the hunting thing. You know, everybody in Wisconsin hunts. So what? How does that become a distraction for you? How do you, well, let me put it to, how do you combat that kind of a distraction?
Well, to your point, a lot of people in Wisconsin do hunt, so that story might have earned me quite a few votes.
You got your mine right there.
It also shows that justices have lives outside of the work that we do, and we're human beings with interests like everyone else. I think it kind of showcases that my roots are in Wisconsin. I was born and raised in the city of Milwaukee. I have family roots in Marathon County, where my dad was born and raised until he entered the Navy, enlisted in the Navy during World War II to serve our country at the age of 18. So I think some of these distracting articles and issues that are raised can shed some light on where I come from and who I am as a person. But when they start going back into my personal life, from things I wrote when I was in college, when I was
that was the next question.
College kid, people I dated 14 years ago, I think the people of Wisconsin are pretty outraged when they see this type of coverage on a very important Wisconsin Supreme Court election. And I think the people of Wisconsin have expressed their outrage to me about how certain irresponsible reporters in the media are reporting on this election, because that's not what the voters want to hear about. They want to hear about the credentials and qualifications and legal and judicial experience of the candidates, and they want to know what our judicial philosophies are.
When we think about the Wisconsin Supreme Court, do you see there a need to change the way we do business, or is it pretty much set in stone in your mind, and this is the path that we should be on?
I think there's always room to change how the Supreme Court operates and how we do business. Not only do we have a case deciding function, we have supervisory and administrative authority over the entire court system in the state of Wisconsin. And besides hearing cases through briefing and oral arguments and writing decisions, we also have public hearings on changing things like the Office of Lawyer Regulation procedures, the Code of Judicial Conduct, lawyer ethics and judicial ethics, practice and procedure in our court system. And how that happens is somebody will ask us to make a change to these types of rules, procedures, and practices. We hold public hearings. We hear from anyone, whether they're a member of the public, members of the legal or judicial professions. We hear from anybody who wants to weigh in on these changes. And then we make a fully informed decision after holding hearings and after reading what can be quite voluminous filings with us on these types of petitions. So I'm always open. I think each of my colleagues are always open to trying to improve how we administer the court system and making appropriate changes.
When a change comes up like that, someone recommends a change, is it very often that that happens, or is it kind of maybe once a year or twice a year you get something like that? Can it happen pretty often?
It can happen pretty often. We typically have public hearings on various petitions presented to us on a monthly basis. So they come up pretty frequently.
Are some of them pretty much the same, one right after another? They all follow along the same line, or are they completely different? One might be something for a constitutional amendment for the state, or another might be something for a statute.
They can be things like we just recently had a petition and approved that petition on e-filing, electronic filing in the court system. There can be proposals about changing the Office of Lawyer Regulation system. So some of them repeat in the subject matter, but they usually have a different take or are proposing a different change.
Okay. The recent issue between Supreme Court justices in the state of Wisconsin, it kind of got some headlines for a while. Has that thing ever really been resolved?
It hasn't, and given the unique circumstances of that incident, where many of the justices were essentially witnesses or otherwise had information about the incident, it's one of those unfortunate circumstances where there hasn't been a resolution. I think it has prompted some people to think about changes again to how that type of an issue could be decided. And again, like the other justices, I'm always open to making improvements in how our system works and making appropriate changes after we hold public hearings and have anyone who wants to weigh in on those changes weigh in.
If there was one thing that you could change about the Wisconsin Supreme Court, what would that be?
I think that the Wisconsin Supreme Court needs to continue to work on changing the image of the court. I think each of the justices are well aware that the reputation of the court has diminished because of some well-publicized incidents and some interpersonal issues that the justices have had over the last few years. So I think we are, each of us, continuing to work on improving collegiality on the court. And I think that's something I'm contributing really positively to. I come from 20 years of experience in the legal and judicial professions, and I've always been able to get along with my colleagues in a variety of work settings, even opposing counsel in the heat of battle in the courtroom. I just have an easygoing personal demeanor and judicial temperament, and I'm bringing that to the court.
That's not easy, is it?
Depends on your personality.
Okay.
I don't take it personally if somebody disagrees with me. In fact, I find that really interesting. I like to talk to people who have differing viewpoints than I have. I think that's what makes life very interesting, and so I don't take any disagreements like that personally.
When you think about being a candidate, does that sometimes have an effect on some of the decisions that you have to make?
Not at all. I completely separate what is going on in my race to retain my seat from the work that I'm doing. And when I'm doing my work, when I am deciding cases or looking at these types of petitions to change rules of practice and procedure, for example, I am completely focused on the law in front of me and making decisions based on the law and based on the information presented to me in the case of these rules petitions.
Now, it could get pretty passionate, can't it, when you're hearing a case and the lawyers are giving you their viewpoints and they're giving you their oral arguments. Sometimes they can be pretty passionate about the law and how it's set up and how it reads. How do you separate the wheat from the chaff, where it's, well, yeah, that sounds good, but the law says? How can you make that decision?
Well, I always appreciate when somebody, whether they are a lawyer, a judge, or a justice, when they get passionate about an issue, especially for the advocates who really believe in the case and the position that they're presenting to us. But at the end of the day, I'm very focused on the text of the law that I'm called upon to apply, whether that is the Constitution or statutes in Wisconsin or the body of case law precedent that has developed around the issue. I kind of set aside the passion that I hear in the oral arguments or even through the written briefs, and I focus on the text of the law that is presented to me that I have to apply to the facts.
To kind of give us a feel for what you're thinking now that the campaign is in full swing and it's a couple of weeks away, it's election
24
day.
days.
We have to think about, where do you see yourself in, say, 10 years?
In 10 years, I hope to be concluding a full term on the court, and I hope at that point, after the people of Wisconsin have had a chance to see 10 years of my work and my service on the court, that I have earned the respect and the trust of the people of Wisconsin. I also hope in 10 years to have made a significant impact on combating human trafficking in Wisconsin. That is an issue that came to my attention when I was serving on the Milwaukee trial court bench in children's court, and there is a real plague in our state where our children are being trafficked, and it is something I hope to make everyone in Wisconsin aware of so that we can eradicate this evil in our society.
Where do you see yourself in 20 years?
in 20 years, I might perhaps be finishing up a second term on the Wisconsin Supreme Court, although I've really given up trying to predict my career path. When I started out as a lawyer, I did not envision or plan on a career in the judiciary. I really felt called to do this public service for the people of Wisconsin 4 years ago when I first became a judge, and so I will see what I am called to do at that point in my life.
But that leads to the next question, and this is the final one, and then we're going to have to sum it up. But that is, do you ever see yourself on the U.S. Supreme Court? Fair question.
It is a fair question. I'm very focused on serving the people of Wisconsin. I love my state. I have lived and worked here, and now I'm serving the people of Wisconsin my entire life. And so I envision myself continuing to serve the people in the state that I love so much.
Okay. And with that, that'll wrap up another edition of Shaken Up Kenosha. Tune in next time for stories of interest and topics that tend to make you enjoy yourself here in Kenosha. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.
As a parent, I know one of the most important times to be with your children is when they aren't feeling well. That's when the love and comfort of a family is essential to a child's well-being. For many families, there's a place they can go to find the support they need.
Ronald McDonald House Charities programs provide that supportive environment so families can be together while their children are dealing with serious illnesses and undergoing treatment. It's a home away from home for families in need, giving them more time for hugs, kisses, and quiet moments together.
You can volunteer your time at a local Ronald McDonald House and help a family in need by cooking a meal or hosting a movie night. You can also drop your extra change in an RMHC canister.
These contributions, both large and small, help more than 10,000 families every day. Proof that a little help goes a long way. Today is a great day for all of us to show our support and help give families in need more time together.
To find out how you can get involved in your community, visit rmhc.org.
Are you camera shy but would like to get behind the scenes of the fun-filled world of television production? Then Kenosha TV just might be the place for you. Every week, your friends and neighbors on Kenosha TV create new programs. We always need people like you to help direct the shows, man the cameras, tweak the audio, and have a great time in producing programming for Kenosha viewers. No experience is necessary. Kenosha TV provides the training and equipment for you. For more information, give us a call or go to our website.
Take my hand and start a brand new day, and together as one we'll start to see some change.
Underneath everything we are, underneath everything we do, we are all people, connected, interdependent, united. And when we reach out a hand to one, we can influence the condition of all. That's what it means to live united.